feeling lost. Carl Jung reveals the real reason your life isn't working. Have you ever stared at the ceiling late at night, wondering why your life feels like it's missing something? Maybe you've done everything right, got the job, followed the plan, tried to think positively, and still, there's that hollow echo inside. A kind of spiritual vertigo. You're not alone. In fact, Carl Jung believed this sensation of lostness is not a flaw, but a signal, a vital alarm from the unconscious. And if we ignore it, we risk wandering further from our true nature. But what if this feeling of being lost isn't the problem, but the beginning of the solution? Let's get real. Most of us live in a world that rewards conformity. We're taught from childhood to suppress the weird parts of ourselves, to fit into molds, to play safe. But Jung argued that the psyche, the totality of our conscious and unconscious minds, doesn't care about societal rules. It wants wholeness, not perfection. And when we ignore it, when we live only on the surface, smiling while something deeper is screaming, that's when life stops working. That's when we feel like we're drifting. Not because we're broken, but because we're ignoring the map we were born with. Think about that for a second. What if your discomfort is your soul trying to lead you back to yourself? Jung called this process individuation. It's not self-improvement. It's not becoming better. It's becoming whole. It's the lifelong journey of reconciling all parts of ourselves, the light and the dark, the known and the unknown. And here's the twist. The parts of ourselves we reject the most, the anger, the fear, the envy, the desire, are often the ones holding the greatest keys to our transformation. Jung called this our shadow, the hidden aspects of our personality that the ego refuses to see. Now pause. Ask yourself, what parts of you have you shoved into the dark? What feelings are you afraid to admit you have? That pain you feel, that sense that something's missing? It might be your shadow knocking. And the more you ignore it, the louder it knocks. That's why so many people feel lost even amidst material success. Because they've built a life around a fake self, a mask, and masks are heavy. They're not sustainable. Eventually they crack, and when they do, we either break down or break through.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
So what's the real reason your life might not be working? It's because you're living someone else's story and following someone else's script. Jung warned that people often reach midlife and realize that everything they've built was in service to an identity that isn't truly theirs. He called this the midlife crisis, but it's not really a crisis, it's a calling, a spiritual initiation, an invitation to stop performing and start integrating. Let me ask you this. If you stripped away every label, your job, your appearance, your achievements, what would be left? Who are you beneath all that? If that question terrifies you, good. That's where the gold is. Jung believed that the most terrifying thing is to accept ourselves completely, because doing so forces us to confront the reality that we are not just what we present to the world. We are also what we fear, what we deny, and what we hide. But paradoxically, that's where our power lies, or in the integration of opposites, in the embrace of contradiction. We live in a culture obsessed with light, positivity, success, happiness. But Jung reminds us that there is no light without darkness, that wholeness requires us to descend before we ascend, to enter the cave before we find the treasure. So, if you're feeling lost, maybe you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Maybe you're standing at the threshold of your real life, waiting to step out of the role you were cast in and into the person you were meant to become. But here's the catch: the journey isn't easy. It requires radical honesty. It demands that we question everything we've been told about who we are and what we should want. And most people aren't ready for that. But you are. You're watching this because something inside you knows there's more, knows that the life you're living isn't the one you were meant for. So let me ask you another question. Are you willing to disappoint others in order to be true to yourself? Because that's what it often takes. Stepping into authenticity means breaking the agreements you made while asleep. Agreements like I must be nice, or I must be successful, or I must never fail. Jung would say those are masks of the ego, and the ego, while necessary, is not the king. The self is. The deeper, wiser part of you that's been whispering all along. The one that shows up in your dreams, in your gut feelings, in those moments of strange synchronicity that make you feel like the universe is trying to tell you something. And maybe it is. So next time you feel lost, don't panic. Listen. That silence might be the voice of your soul finally getting a word in. And if you dare to follow, you might just find that the path you were looking for isn't out there, it's in here. Why your shadow holds the key to a life you actually want. Carl Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. In other words, it's not about pretending to be good. It's about becoming whole. And that means facing what we've spent our entire lives avoiding, the shadow. The shadow is everything you deny, suppress, or avoid in yourself. It's the part of you that you've exiled in order to be accepted. And here's the paradox: everything you've buried in that darkness, all the fear, jealousy, rage, lust, inadequacy, those are not your enemies. They are your teachers, because hidden in each rejected part of you is a fragment of your power, your truth, your soul. And until you bring them into the light, your life will never truly feel like your own. It's uncomfortable to admit, but many of our problems stem from the fact that we're at war with ourselves. Think about it. How often do you judge yourself for feeling a certain way? For being too emotional, too ambitious, too needy, too different? Society teaches us to disown these traits in favor of what's socially acceptable. But every time you suppress a feeling, you don't actually destroy it. You just drive it underground. And what lives underground doesn't die, it festers. It leaks into your relationships, your decisions, your moods, your dreams. It becomes passive aggression, addiction, self-sabotage, depression. You think you're being good, but you're actually just being incomplete. So the shadow isn't evil. It's repressed life force. It's creativity exiled. It's the parts of you that once had a voice and were told to shut up. And once you begin to face your shadow, really face it with honesty and compassion, you begin to reclaim that stolen energy. You begin to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. You stop performing and start living. Jung believed that the unconscious is not just a warehouse of forgotten memories, it's a living, dynamic force that's trying to bring you into balance. When you're off track, it doesn't just sit back and watch. It intervenes. Through dreams, symbols, emotions, illnesses, and crises. But that feeling of being lost, it's not random. It's a message. A sign that something important is trying to surface. And most often, what's trying to surface is part of your shadow. Let me ask you something that most people are too afraid to ask themselves. What are you pretending not to know about yourself? Sit with that. because the answer to that question might be the key to everything you're searching for. Maybe you've always known you were meant for something different, but you've suffocated that voice under the weight of responsibilities or expectations. Maybe you've always felt like an imposter because deep down, you're trying to live a life that's not aligned with your truth. That's not failure. That's feedback. Your soul is trying to course correct. Here's a wild idea. What if the parts of you that you're most ashamed of are actually the source of your genius? What if your anger is really a compass pointing to your boundaries? What if your envy is a clue to what you truly desire? What if your fear is a guardian standing at the gate of your transformation? Jung didn't see these emotions as problems to fix. He saw them as archetypes, ancient forces within us that carry meaning, wisdom, and energy. When we ignore them, we become hollow. When we engage them, we become whole. But shadow work isn't just inner journaling or talking to a therapist, though those are great tools. It's a lifestyle of radical self-honesty. It's catching yourself in the act of blaming someone else and asking, what part of me am I projecting onto them? It's noticing the things that trigger you and asking, what part of myself have I abandoned that this situation is reflecting back to me? It's having the courage to feel what you've never felt before, to speak truths you've swallowed, to accept parts of yourself you once believed made you unlovable. The irony is that once you begin this journey, life starts to work again, not because everything becomes easy, but because you're no longer divided against yourself. You're not wasting energy pretending. You're not trying to be liked by everyone. You're not afraid of your own truth. You become magnetic not by trying, but by being whole. And people feel it. Opportunities align. You stop chasing and start attracting. Because you're finally aligned with your real self, not the mask. So instead of asking, how do I fix my life? Ask, what part of me have I rejected that is trying to come back home? Because that's the real journey. And it's not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before you forgot yourself. Why the life you want is hidden in the chaos you're avoiding. We spend so much of our lives trying to avoid chaos. We crave control, order, predictability, anything that makes us feel safe. But what if that very obsession with safety is the reason we feel stuck? Carl Jung taught that the path to wholeness doesn't go around chaos, it goes through it. The chaos you're avoiding isn't your enemy. It's your initiation. It's the storm that breaks down the false walls you've built around yourself. And buried in that storm is the life you've been unconsciously seeking. Let's get uncomfortable for a second. What if everything that's falling apart in your life right now, your relationships, your career, your sense of identity, isn't a breakdown, but a breakthrough in disguise? Most people spend their lives trying to hold up a structure that no longer serves them. And they white-knuckle their way through jobs they hate, relationships that drain them, identities that don't fit. Why? Because it feels safer to cling to the known than to face the unknown. But Jung warned that the unconscious will not allow us to live inauthentically forever. If we ignore the deeper parts of ourselves long enough, the unconscious will erupt in dreams, in crises, in chaos. The chaos isn't random, it's intelligent. It's your inner world revolting against the lie you've been living. And if you dare to listen, if you dare to stay present in the discomfort, you'll begin to see that the chaos is not destruction, it's deconstruction. It's taking apart everything that isn't real so you can finally build something that is. Ask yourself this: what in your life feels like it's crumbling right now? And instead of asking, how do I fix it? Ask, what truth is trying to emerge from this? Chaos is the birthplace of transformation. Every myth, every hero's journey begins with the descent into the unknown, the underworld, the belly of the beast. That's not a metaphor, it's a psychological necessity. You cannot become who you are without shedding who you were. And that shedding doesn't feel like a peaceful meditation retreat. It feels like confusion, grief, rage, loneliness. It feels like falling apart. But in that falling apart, the false layers are stripped away, and only what's real remains. What's terrifying is that we've been taught to fear this process. We've been conditioned to think that not having all the answers means something is wrong with us. But Jung would say that not knowing is sacred. It's the space where the ego dies and the self is born. It's the womb of potential, the beginning of a life that isn't driven by fear or approval, but by authenticity. So here's a paradox to consider. The more you try to control your life, the more you disconnect from your soul. And the more you surrender to the unknown, the more your real life begins to emerge. Life doesn't ask for your perfection, it asks for your participation. Your willingness to feel, to face, to fall. And in doing so, you become someone you never knew you could be, not because you added more to yourself, but because you finally let go of what you're not. The chaos you're avoiding might be the only thing strong enough to wake you up, to shake you out of the trance of busyness, of performance, of pretending. It's not comfortable, but it's honest. And inside that honesty is the raw material of your rebirth. Jung called this process alchemy, not the literal transformation of lead into gold, but the psychological transformation of the fragmented self into the unified whole. And just like in alchemy, the process requires heat, pressure, and time. It's not instant, it's not easy, but it's real. Let me ask you something deeper. What would happen if you stopped trying to hold your life together? What if you let it fall apart, just long enough to see what's underneath? Because maybe what's underneath isn't ruin, it's truth. Maybe the ashes of what you've lost are the soil for what you're meant to become. Maybe the chaos isn't the end, but the beginning of a life that actually makes sense, not because it's perfect, but because it's yours. True transformation doesn't come from avoiding chaos. It comes from dancing with it, from entering the fire willingly, knowing that what burns away was never really you. And what remains raw, unfiltered, and whole, that is the self Jung spoke of. The self that doesn't need to be fixed, only revealed. The real you has been waiting, how to reclaim your soul and finally feel alive. So here we are on the edge of something deeper. If you've made it this far, then something inside you is already awakening. Maybe it's faint, like a whisper. Maybe it's loud, like a scream. But it's there. The truth is, you've always known. You've known that there's more to life than ticking boxes, putting on a smile, and calling that happiness. You've known that the version of you the world sees is just the tip of something vast, ancient, and powerful beneath the surface. And that power, it's your soul, the real you. The you that has been waiting not for the world to change, but for you to remember. Carl Jung believed that the soul is not lost, it's buried, covered up by years of conditioning, fear, and compromise. But it never stops calling. It shows up in dreams that haunt you, in longings you can't explain, in the sudden weight of silence when you realize you've been living someone else's life. The soul will not be silenced forever. And when you finally turn toward it, when you stop running and start listening, something unbelievable happens. life begins to feel real again. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about unbecoming everything you were never meant to be. It's about peeling back the layers of who you were told to be until what's left is raw, true, and whole. That's what Jung meant by individuation, not self-improvement, but self-remembrance. You don't need to be better, you need to be more you. Let me ask you one final, terrifyingly beautiful question. What would your life look like if you were fully, unapologetically yourself? Not the curated version, not the filtered one, but the real one. The one that cries when it hurts, laughs too loud, dreams too big, and refuses to shrink in the face of fear. That version of you is still alive, still reachable, and every moment you choose honesty over performance, presence over perfection, courage over comfort, you take one step closer to reclaiming it. There's no map for this journey, no checklist, just a willingness to meet yourself where you are, to feel what you feel, to go into the dark, not to stay there, but to retrieve what's been lost. Your soul is not in some distant future. It's here, in your pain, in your joy, in your questions, in your chaos. And if you dare to follow it, you may find that the life you were searching for was never out there. It was always inside you, waiting for you to come home. So if you're feeling lost, that's okay. Maybe you're not lost at all. Maybe you're just beginning. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most honest place to start. Because in the end, as Jung taught us, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And that privilege is yours if you're willing to claim it.